So in this lecture, we're going to talk about how to build a startup. What's my idea? How do I create a business model? What is the size of the opportunity? And how do I develop a customer base? So we're going to talk a little bit about these pieces. So when we build a startup, typically we follow this flow, this process that we go through. We first have an idea. We say, okay, this is a good idea. This is a market that's underserved. This is something that is going to be profitable. This is something that can scale. Usually those are all theory. Those are all pieces that we've come up with that we want to test. At that point, we take our technology, our idea, our theories, and we put them into a business model. And this is still very conceptual. We talk about, here's all the parts and pieces that we need. This is who we would hire. This is what we need to invent. This is something we need to purchase. And we go through and we start defining out the parts and pieces of the model. In the next lecture, we'll get into some very specific definitions of what those parts and pieces of a business model really are. But at that point, once we have a business model, we can start to define that customer base, and then we can really start to measure what is the size of the opportunity. How much market share could we gain? What new market could we create? What new verticals could we enter into? And at that point, it's really about what is the potential of this business or the size of the opportunity. And then we move into customer discovery. We start to bring this to customers, and we start to find the right customer segments that will look at our startup, and then we start to grab customer validation. Customers decide if they want to buy the product or the service that we're offering, and we start to gain feedback. And really, at the end of this, step number 5 is the first time we start to get critical feedback on our business. And so this critical feedback about customer validation, how many adopters will there be in a customer segment, helps us go back and redefine our customer discovery and who our customers really are. Once we know who those customers are, we start to redefine our size of our opportunity, and then the size of opportunity really starts to affect what the business model should look like. And so if you can see, there's this looping process that we go through. Now, in a startup, in an entrepreneurial marketing venture, we don't do this just one time. This isn't just about let's validate our idea one time and then we're good to go and ready to scale. But while we're in startup mode, we're going through this constant validation process. And we have some of this that's in theory and some of it that really is in the practice. And so the theoretical side of this is about having ideas, scaling the ideas through changes in business model and understanding the size of opportunity. But then once we put this in front of the customer, that's where it hits the practice, and we're gaining so much feedback from that customer, which really defines what our next step will be. And in almost every business that I've ever been involved in, there's been an initial idea that we go to market with. Typically, it's some modified version of that idea, and then through that process, we discover these really nice pieces that can be added on and can be scaled. And sometimes it's the third or fourth iteration that becomes that very scalable, very profitable piece. And that's okay. It's just important that you go into this process with an idea that, hey, I think I know, but I don't know everything. And on some level, I don't even know what I don't know until I go through the customer validation process and start to gain that feedback. And so that's very important in the startup process. So web startups, you will notice, can get their product out to market a lot earlier through an agile or some type of early development process. And so you might have heard of agile development. In the past, before so much technology at our fingertips, we had to really prepare our product, and we had to get everything ready in this waterfall style. We have to design our shoe, produce our shoe, and take the shoe to market. We have to, build our retail store, get everything polished, everything awesome, and then finally open the doors to the public before we gain that first ounce of feedback. But one of the nice things about a tech startup is we can build something that we call the minimum viable product. What are all my parts and pieces that I need in order to get my product to market very quickly so I can get to the customer validation part, gain that customer validation or get that customer feedback, and then go back and retool and bring a better product to market. And so this iterative process in a tech startup can be very quick, and it can get us to the right product a much faster timeline than we used to be able to do. So let's talk specifically about business model. We've already said that a business model describes all the parts of a company that are necessary to make money. Well, what are those parts? So there are a couple of different frameworks out there, but the one that has become the most widely accepted framework for how you build a startup is something called the business model canvas. Now, the business model canvas is really just that. It's a canvas upon which we can put our ideas and start to paint a picture of what our business is going to look like. And so we use this canvas to describe, to challenge, to design, to invent, to build a business model more systematically. And this hasn't been around a long time. You know, we first saw this business model canvas come into play, really just since 2005, 2006. We started to see, people start to formulate an idea that in all the chaos and all the changing and the fast-paced movement of a startup, that there is a way to take a big step back and look at ultimately what the pieces are that need to fall in place in order for a startup to be successful. We can start to segment those and create these buckets or these sections of a business model canvas that we can start to fill through our startup process. So let's go through what those parts and pieces are, and let's talk about the 9 building blocks that go into building a startup. So the very first one that we're going to talk about is a customer segment. Customer segment, it's not so much about defining a geography or even a demographic of a certain type of person we want to sell to. It's really more about circumstances and psychographics. So let me give you an example. There might be something like let's say a phone case. Say that you want to sell phone cases for iPhone and Android devices. Well, what is the target customer segment for a phone case? Well, until we get into very specific details about the phone case, that customer segment is very broad. It could be anything from a 5 or a 6-year-old up to the very end of somebody's life. Anybody who has a phone is going to need a case for their phone. So it's a very broad market. Now, if we start to talk about specific types of phone cases, maybe it's something you can hold on to very easily. Maybe it's got like that pop socket on the back of it that you could hold on to and you don't drop your phone as much. Well, now we can start to talk about wants and needs of customers, and we can build buckets of customer segments. And it's not necessarily going to fall down the lines of demographics. Just because I'm a middle-aged, married, white male with children doesn't mean that my wants and needs are going to be any different than an African-American person who is in their 20s who is single. Demographics are very segmenting and they're very old school. Now, they help us understand people that are working with us, but without the complement of psychographics, wants and needs, and getting to a real humanizing perspective, we don't really understand our customer segments. And we'll do some examples in later lectures, and we'll talk more about customer segmentation. It's a very important part of the canvas and the business model process, understanding who your customers are, who you're going to sell to, and why they would buy from you. The next piece is really about the why. It's about the value proposition. Now, a value proposition is typically why somebody works with you in your business and why would they want to exchange their money for your goods and services. However, we'll get deeper into value propositions in later lectures, and we'll learn that it's not just about I like what you have, so I want to buy it from you, that sometimes it's about I have a real problem that needs to be solved, and the solution solves the problem better than what I have right now, if I have anything at all. Or Sometimes it's about providing gains. Maybe we have no problem. Maybe life is really good. We just see something that would make it a little bit better. And so, upgrading to the latest phone, buying that new purse, maybe getting a new pair of shoes. It's not because our shoes are worn out, our purse is broken, or our phone is broken, although those are reasons to make a purchase. Those are problems we could solve. But sometimes all of our goods are fine, but we want better shoes, we want a nicer purse, or we need a better phone. We tell ourselves we need a better phone, but we really just want a better phone. So value proposition can be for a lot of reasons, and it's important that you know that your customer segment is buying from you because of it's solving a pain or it's providing a gain. And knowing that about your customer allows you to tailor your product a little bit better to sell it a little bit faster. So the next area of the business model canvas, the third area, is channels. Now, channels is about how we communicate our value proposition to our customer. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you wanted to buy bananas. Now, if you want just to buy 2 bananas, you can go to a grocery store and you can buy 2 bananas. They sell them by the pound, no problem. But if you go to a Costco or a Sam's Club, one of these big box stores, they're not going to sell you 2 bananas. The expectation is that if you're going to buy bananas, you're going to buy enough bananas to get a discount and make it worth their while. And so there's a implied value in shopping in a big box store that we are trading volume for discount. Now that is something that's implicit in that channel. Now if I sell bananas, I'm going to sell them very differently at a big box store than I sell them at a grocery store, than I sell them at a convenience store. So if you walked into, a convenience store at a gas station, you might see bananas on the counter. I'll bet you that those bananas on the counter sold individually are going to cost a lot more than the bananas in bulk at a big box store. And so why is that? Why are they providing the same value proposition to different customer segments at different prices through different channels? Well, it comes down to that customer segmentation, the wants and needs, and how we make that purchase. Now, we'll go into this a lot deeper in future lectures, but channels are really about how we sell and communicate to that customer and what are the implied values through each of those channels, and how can I tailor my product for each one of those channels. The next area is about customer relationships. What is it that tethers that customer to our business? Now, there's been a lot of advancements in the last 20 or 30 years with memberships, with discounting, with all kinds of reasons for us to purchase from a particular entity. And people have realized in their business that if they can tether you to their value proposition and keep you from looking elsewhere, they're going to profit off of you for much longer. So here's a classic example. The big box stores sell memberships, $30, $40, $50 to be a member of this exclusive club, except for it's an exclusive club that everybody can join if they're just willing to spend the $30 or $40. Now, as a consumer, we're going to rationalize, well, I'm going to save a lot more than that $40, $50 over the space of a year, and so the membership makes sense. But that never was really what the membership was about. The membership is about getting you focused on that big box store and only going there in your time of need when you're going to make major purchases. I happen to be living in a neighborhood that is right between a Costco and a Sam's Club. And what's really interesting is the neighborhood is very divided. Half the people go to Sam's Club and half the people go to Costco. And what's interesting is there's very, very few people that I've ever been able to find that will maintain a membership at both locations. Now, you might think because they have similar stuff, you might think that there's a lot of reasons why, but it's been proven that people are going to pick one or the other and they're going to stay with them for a very long time. And so really offering that $40, $50 membership is about tethering people and creating a customer relationship. You know that that's your big box store, that's where you shop, that's where you want to go. There's lots of other ways that we tether customers. We have customer clubs, we have point systems where as you purchase, you can earn points that can be redeemed for more discounts and more purchases. You see this with airline miles. You see this with hotel points. And so we need to figure out, how do we build our relationship with our customer? It might be through a program or system, or it might be through corporate responsibility. It might be through some type of a policy that endears them to us. And so it's about creating that customer advocacy. The next area of the segment of the business model canvas, the next segment of the business model canvas is revenue stream. So how is our business going to make money? Is there one revenue stream, or are there multiple revenue streams? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. The next area are key resources. So what are the things that we need to have in place in order for us to be able to sell our product? Are there input products that go into the production of our product? Are there relationships that we need to have? Are there resources in terms of personnel that we need to have in place, maybe skilled labor? And so what are the resources we need in order to produce our product, our service, our value proposition? What are the key activities that are going to go on in order to produce it? So if we know what the resources are and then how those resources are going to be used, that is the definition of those key activities. So do we need to manufacture something? Do we need to ship something? Do we need to sell something in a certain location? What are those key activities? Also, what are the key partnerships? Are we going to handle our manufacturing? Are we going to source everything? Or are we going to have a second company that we work with, or maybe multiple companies to source our product? And so we need to define those key partnerships, know who they are, and then along with those key partnerships and key resources and key activities, we need to define the last area, which is our cost structure. And so if we're purchasing a product, it's going to be very different than if we're manufacturing a product. And in the manufacturing process, there can be labor, there can be machinery, there can be insurances. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. And so understanding our cost structure will all relate back to that revenue stream and understanding what is our pricing and how do we go to market. Now, something that's very important is and we will have a whole lecture on how we set up cost structures and pricing as we go to market. But one thing that's very important here is when it comes time to go to market, we have to make a decision about how are we going to price our product. And one thing that I don't like to do, and I see more and more people do this, is they look at all of their costs, they apply what they think, what they guess should be a profit margin, and they come up with what they call a reasonable price. So if it costs us $100 to produce our product, and we feel like we should have a 50% margin, then putting us at that price point might actually be much lower than the market. Maybe the market is willing to pay $400 for our product, and we should really have a 75% margin in our product. And so knowing what the margin is and really, what the market will bear is just as important as knowing what our cost structure is. And so I read a book years and years ago that talked about how we set up our pricing. And they talked about that if you do this, where you calculate your cost and come up with your margin and go in with a minimum kind of fair price, that you should be prepared to double that price at some point, and then double it again and keep doubling it, literally double, until the market starts to slow down for what you're offering. And so, once you figure out that your price is so high that nobody wants to pay the money for it, you can back down to the last tier, and then you have a pretty good idea of what the maximum is for your market. Now, the first time I heard this, I thought that's absolutely crazy. And I was in a service-based business where we were charging an hourly rate. In that business, we were charging $20 an hour to perform a particular operation. And then I took the advice and I doubled it to $40. And then I doubled it again to $80. And then eventually I doubled it again to $160. Well, that was a lot of doubling, except for, guess what? We were still busy. And then I started to ask around and realized around the country that there were other markets like California and New York where they were charging even more than I was. And so we were working out of state a lot in a lot of other states. And so I doubled it one more time. And now I'm at $300 an hour for something just a year ago I was charging $20 an hour. At $300 an hour, I saw that people started to back off. we weren't getting as much business. And so we actually backed down. And ultimately, the price that we settled on was $150 an hour. It's a lot different than $20 an hour, and we were able to offer better jobs, hire better employees, and we were able to grow the business quite a bit because even with better employees, there was still quite a bit of margin in there, and we were able to make a lot more money. And so revenue stream sometimes, it's definitely a factor of how many units am I going to sell and at what price, but sometimes there are the prices can be raised, and sometimes there's additional add-on revenue streams that we can find. And so there's a whole discussion, and we'll get deeper into that in this course. So in the next lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about a case study, and we're going to run through an example of a company that came to market very strong. So I look forward to this next lecture. I'll see you there.